The film Toast is based upon the autobiographical book Toast, The Story of a Boy's Hunger, written by English food writer Nigel Slater. The film follows a young Nigel in the 1960s Britain, who lives on toast until Mrs. Potter, the maid, comes into his life. There is no denying Mrs. Potter made a decent apple pie. In fact, it was the most glorious thing I had ever put in my mouth. Nigel takes up home ec because he wants to win his father's heart through food like Mrs. Potter has done. The scone scene is the first time Nigel is ever praised by his father. This makes Mrs. Potter think they are in competition for the father's love, and every time Nigel brings food home, she has already made sure he is fed full with her cooking instead of his. After Nigel's father has again been fed by Mrs. Potter, he goes into the kitchen to try the dessert she has made. Asking for the secret, Mrs. Potter won't tell him and lets him know he might as well give up, reaffirming that she thinks they are in competition. He experiments until he gets the recipe perfect. Nigel perfects the recipe, but as usual, Mrs. Potter has filled his father up and won't even try a mouthful. Mrs. Potter claims Nigel stole her recipe, but he points out mine has peel in it. We are going to attempt our own lemon meringue pie using Katharine Tidy, the food stylist of Toast, her recipe. First, the pastry. Sieve 225 grams of flour into a bowl and press 125 grams of cold cut butter through your fingers until the mixture looks like fine breadcrumbs. Gradually add the cold water, approximately 2 tablespoons, mixing with a knife, which helps prevent overworking the dough, and then your hands come together. See how I am just squishing the ingredients together? It has just formed a ball, and cling film that and flatten it into a disc. Chill it in the fridge for 30 minutes. This allows the short crust pastry to not only rest, but absorb the water we added. Then roll out the pastry and line a 9 cm flan case, gently lowering the edges of the pastry into the corners. Make sure to leave some overhang of the pastry around the edges to avoid shrinkage in the oven. Then poke with a fork, which is called docking the pastry, and will help prevent bubbles from forming on the pastry during baking. Bake it blind for approximately 10 minutes at 160 degrees Celsius. Line with baking paper and fill with rice or dried beans. See how it's right up to the top? It must be right up to the top. And cook until golden brown, 25 to 30 minutes. Then remove the rice from the tart shell. Whisk 1 egg yolk and brush the inside of the shell, making sure to coat all over. This is going to prevent the lemon curd from making the shell soggy later on. Place back into the oven for another 10 minutes while still hot. Use a knife to cut through the edges of the pastry. The lemon layer. For the lemon filling, grate the zest of 1 lemon. Remember, in the film, Nigel makes it a point to Mrs. Potter that his meringue uses lemon peel, unlike hers. Sprinkle 10 grams of gelatine powder into a tablespoon of water. Leave for a few minutes. Wipe a bowl and whisk down with vinegar. Then place the egg whites into that bowl and the egg yolks into another. The recipe has amounts for a deeper flan pan, like in the film. This is why my ingredients for the filling are doubled, because I thought maybe my flan pan was deep enough. It definitely was not. Place all the ingredients in except the egg yolks. Bring slowly to the boil, mixing slowly to combine, allowing the sugar and cornstarch to dissolve and thicken. Remember, once you see bubbles, continue mixing for about 1 minute to make sure the cornstarch has cooked through. Remove from the heat. Whisk the egg yolks gradually to thicken the lemon mix. Return to the heat, but do not allow it to boil. Place bloom gelatine in the microwave or in a saucepan and slowly heat until the gelatine has melted. Add the gelatine mixture along with yellow food coloring for that 60s vibe. They would put food coloring in everything. Pour into the pre-baked flan case and allow it to cool completely, about 2 hours or overnight would be best. As you know, I still had a lot of lemon curd left over, so I made lemon cheesecakes with malt biscuit bases, with cream cheese mixed with condensed milk, then poured the lemon curd on top. I placed these in my freezer for 2 hours, then wrapped them up, placed them back in the freezer. They last a month. Meringue directions. Okay, I'm not going to lie, it took 3 attempts at the meringue and 2 tarts later to get the meringue right. I will show you where I went wrong and how I fixed it. My first attempt, the recipe calls for French meringue method, which I was already nervous about. The recipe, all it says is whisk the egg whites until thick and you can hold the bowl upside down without the egg whites falling out. Then gradually add the sugar. Well, I spread this meringue onto the mix, making sure to cover right to the edges, then piled on top to form a dome. Then I went to cut the meringue and it had already started to turn back into egg white. The bottom of the tart was getting soggy. But I mean, the slice of pie was beautiful and high, but there was already a pool of egg white in the bottom of my tart shell. So my second attempt, I went to Preppy Kitchen, the king of baking, and he says to gradually add the sugar when a small amount of bubbles have formed in your egg whites. Then make sure that the sugar has dissolved before turning that speed up and beating for a while. I beated mine for 10 minutes. As you can see, this made the meringue a lot more stable, and look when I cut through it, it holds its shape really well. But the tart shell was ruined from my first attempt at the French method. So I went ahead and made an entirely new tart shell and lemon curd filling. I used my Swiss meringue method technique for this last attempt as I am familiar with it, and I like the cooked egg whites give a stable meringue that won't disintegrate on me. This method I used 5 egg whites and 1 cup of sugar and heated the mixture to 75 degrees Celsius over a bain-marie and whisked those egg whites until stiff peaks formed. I spread the mixture over the pie, giving the dome shape, and doing this with my spatula to give peaks all around the dome. Then bake in the oven at its highest heat for about 5 to 10 minutes until lightly coloured. Do not take your eyes off of this pie because it will go from golden brown to black very quickly, people. Now to cut into the pie, this was the best. The meringue, the marshmallow and the lemon curd filling is the thickest I have found in a recipe. I love how it uses both corn flour and gelatine to make sure it's firm to hold its shape for cutting, but is also smooth and silky with just the right amount of tart when you bite into it. With my last attempt at the meringue, I had 5 egg yolks left over. So I mixed with 125 grams plain flour. I kneaded it for 7 minutes to form a smooth dough, rolled it into a ball, wrapped it, placed it in the fridge for 1 hour, then rolled it into a long sheet, made some flowers because why not, and cut it into bow tie pasta. Boiled them up and had it for dinner with peas and capers. If you like this video, go ahead and watch the next video about the rise and fall of the cupcake.